Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast aligned to this audio podcast this audio podcast around the Bostix feature. This is an audio podcast in around the science of traption, the Bostix Ruptre, and the Bostix Ruptre Feature 4. And This is an audio podcast aligned to another childhood edition and another aligned to an evidence-based perspective. This is an audio podcast aligned to another Storm Bostix production. What I thought I'd do today, or what I thought I'd do here, is talk a little bit about some works that have been published in 2019 in the journal of the British Islamic Medical Association, aligned to using social media, mainstream media, to prompt organ donation and transplantation sort of education and sort of a scientist perspective on chronic kidney disease, or CKD. And I thought I'd do the basis the basis around this audio podcast is aligned to recently returned from having recently returned from the 50th anniversary of the British Association of Pediatric Nephrology, BAPN, and the 25th anniversary of the Pediatric Nephrology Nursing Group, PNNG, organization, where there was a joint, wherein the BAPN and PNNG had a joint joint conference, a joint seminar that recently took place, and having heard heard some of the presentations in around the different aspects around pediatrics and nephrology from various colleagues, in endeavoring to ensure aspects around chronic kidney disease, in around nephrology and chronic kidney disease, etc. And the practices that are implemented are sort of where they should be, and where presenters and colleagues highlighted some of the advances in around nephrology practices, and specific to pediatrics. I would at the same time, when listening to the various presentations from colleagues, inspired. I was inspired by hearing some of the aspects that were highlighted, and so this prompted me to look at the works, look at this work that had been published in around 2019, and thought to put this overview, if you like, around this particular this subject, this particular focus in around using social media, mainstream media, to prompt organ donation and transplantation education, and a scientist perspective on CKD. And so I'm gonna And so in here the overview will have a focus on will be in around the introduction, aims, the aims, a sort of a review, the Islamic or a faith perspective on this aspect as well, and a sort of a sort of a scientist perspective on this, and some discussions and some conclusions as well. So to begin with, a bit of intro a bit of intro in around this science of traption, and this audio podcast in around the Bostix v.4. Um, so uh, with exception to individuals with severe learning disabilities and neurological illnesses, which of course are devastating in their own right. There has never existed a human being who has not been aware of his or her body, but also of his or her sort of individuality, both physical and spiritual. And there's works that have been sort of highlighted, that have been published in around sort of aspects of in some in aspects of this by Mouse in 1998. Um, Human beings are consciously aware of sort of own lives, and it's as though that it's a, and it's through sort of the understanding that awareness of a consciously constructed self is identified. There's works by Dunn, 1998, who highlight some context in around this as well. The use of social media today provides sort of unparalleled opportunities to provide and receive education, access to communication, and sort of interaction. Social media or mainstream media, such as, for example, television, newspapers, magazines, and radio stations, are also being used to prompt education surrounding specific long-term conditions. Uh, Specific long-term conditions, for example, and these forms of education have not been explored in detail to sorry these forms of education have not been explored in context of detail to prompt sort of organ donation or transplantation education using social media or mainstream media. Certainly, use of social media is not limited by constraints of time and geography. And there's works by Eisenbach and Till in 2001 who sort of highlight some aspects in around this. So the aim around this work specifically were to sort of highlight specific questions, and where in this works there's an attempt to sort of help answer these questions, these particular questions. So there are three main sort of questions in here in this works. Um, Number one, can Muslims donate their organs? Number two, is there an Islamic stance on using social media or mainstream media to prompt organ donation or transplantation education? Number three, does the sort of healthcare scientists. So what I mean by healthcare scientists, listeners, viewers, is basically those who are traditionally sort of laboratory and pathology based health professionals. And the question here is, does the healthcare scientist have a role have a basis providing the public education surrounding organ donation and transplantation, uh, uh, surrounding organ donation and transplantation. And so, to answer these particular questions, the long-term condition, for example, chronic kidney disease or CKD, will be used to provide an example or a basis. So, so to continue in following the intro, the introduction, the introductory aspects, and I'm gonna in the next aspect, the next basis in around this in this works, we'll seek to we'll seek to highlight some aspects in around social media and healthcare and health education. So social media usage has grown exponentially, known now representing a 1 in 5 minutes spent online, and there's several authors that have highlighted sort of some aspects in some works in similarity, if not specific to social media, in around specifically in around media and the use of and the use of online an online basis, and at the same time at the same time where 1 in 5 minutes spent online, and patients and recipients and the lay general public accessing information, combining pivotal issues relating to bases in around organ donation and transplantation, for example, through mainstream media. And so, using social media perhaps has several gains with standard forms of mainstream media where healthcare is concerned, but both have advantages with regards to reach, accessibility, and prompting organ donation awareness and education. And so, using social media versus mainstream media to prompt organ donation or transplantation education offers a sort of opportunity in ways as previously unrealized. And again, there's works by Dunn from works in the late 90s in 1998, by Eisenbach and Till in 2001, and also by works by Eaton retrospectively in 1994. A study conducted on college students in the United States demonstrated that social media-based communication had perhaps the greatest impact for donor registration, and described that a social media campaign which used, for example, social media such as Facebook and YouTube resulted in 9,000 documented donor registrations, and within the student organization, the student or academic organization, and the organ donor registration had increased by 28%. And this works that was published by D'Alessandro and team in 2012 and furthermore, whilst traditional online advertising, for example, offers perhaps the greatest message exposure when combined with the use of social media networking sites to promote donation, it resulted in an increase in the request for organ donation cards and registrations, as well. And this is some works that have been in the media, in mainstream media, for example, the BBC News in 2015 as well. The use of social media alongside existing mass media donation campaigns can be seen to be highly effective. prompting organ donation. And one long-term condition that surrounds organ donation and transplantation quite in sort of detail is for example chronic kidney disease, or CKD. So uh, so the question now is, what is chronic kidney disease, or what is CKD? So CKD is a long-term irreversible clinical condition, has a clinical a sort of basis or condition, and has been described in literature as the gradual and usually permanent loss of renal function or kidney function over time. Early in the disease process, individuals with CKD often experience no symptoms, and for a long time it has been underdiagnosed. It's been an underdiagnosed condition, and there's works by Cameron and team in 2013. Even in the absence of symptoms, CKD appears to add significantly to the impact or burden of, for example, cardiovascular disease, or CVD, and death. And The rate of CKD has been increasing globally, leading to greater need for renal or kidney transplantation. And there's works by Stefanone and team in 2012 in around this. Transplantation is not a cure. However, it is a cost-effective. It's been documented as sort of a cost-effective sort of form of care, compared with a form of healthcare, compared with hemodialysis. For example, hemodialysis in the and aligned to sort of treatment of this of CKD as a long-term condition, and achieves and where transplantation and where it has been documented and sort of in the literature, where transplantation achieves sort of higher prognoses and mortality as well. Currently, so in the literature, living donation accounts for about one third of kidney or renal transplants performed by about one third of currently living kidney donation or renal donation or transplantation accounts for about one third of renal or kidney transplants performed specifically in the United Kingdom or the UK, with increased donation forming the main source or basis for with deceased or cadaveric donation forming a basis in around renal kidney transplantation, renal transplantation as well. And there's works by Sissons in 2011. And the high need but low supply among, for example, minority ethnic populations presents problems presents problems in achieving an optimal match of blood group, for example, and tissue type, where these are less common among the majority population, resulting in patients or recipients from minority ethnic groups, and for example, those from Muslim faith backgrounds spending, for example, an increase in time on the transplantation or transplant waiting list. And there's works that highlighted some aspects in similar from Stefano and team in 2012, and again Sissons in 2011 in context of of sort of the epidemiology aspects in around this. Here now some aspects on what is what is the Islamic stance? What is the Islamic stance or basis to surrounding organ donation or transplantation education? So, from an Islamic perspective, organ donation or transplantation is perhaps more a recent phenomenon, and in some contexts, and started to preoccupy the minds of jurists since in around the 1950s. There's works by Saleh bin Fawzan bin Abdullah in 2015, and Eaton works by Eaton in 2000 as well. And available Islamic literature to date does not provide detail with any sort of Islamic literature to with any with any sort of indication that organ transplantation took place during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. However, early discussions have some implications used as starting points by today's Muslims. One condition is that if a Muslim decides to donate, for example, to donate an organ, for example, he or she must do so out of free will, without being morally or socially forced, and without economic pressures. And there's works again by Saleh bin Fawzan bin Abdullah and Eaton, look at some aspects in around in around some contexts and aspects that look at a basis in around in around sort of the in aspects in around the faith and aspects in around in context of sort of in context of aspects of healthcare, but also in aligned to aspects of justice and peace as well. So if the deceased Muslims indicated during life, for example, in a will, that they do not want to donate organs, then no one is authorized to do so on the deceased behalf, on the deceased person's behalf. And although other, for example, although other sociocultural co-founders are likely to influence the decision-making process, for example, in around Black and Asian minority ethnicity or BAME communities, religion or faith is an important aspect, has been an important aspect of the decision making process for most individuals. And so, to this end, healthcare professionals and service providers should also look to or seek to explore and take advantage of social media, mainstream media, to help facilitate discussions, raising education, and providing evidence-based understanding and providing an evidence-based sort of understanding for sort of ultimate solutions. And there's works by a former sort of King's College London, sort of academic and sort of a researcher um, uh, um, in sort of in the two in the in 2008. Works by Morgan in 2008, and Morgan and team in team in 2006 and in 2013. The use of social media, mainstream media, would, number one, help bring sort of more sort of discussions to the organ donation and transplantation debate. Number two, help with prompting open dialogue with a sort of faith authorities in positions of influence to generate a consensus for further all-inclusive frameworks and guidelines. And number three, prompt organ donation transplantation to specific and aligned to specific diseases. And four, and also four, provide sort of channels or basis for interaction with individuals, families, and communities to discuss the to discuss some of the most sensitive and important issues. And also five, sort of encourage personal decision making by sort of an intellectual on an intellectual basis. And this may be challenging. Whilst this may be sort of a challenging subject to subject of our basis for sort of discussion or conversation, it is an important one because it has the potential to promote organ donation among an approximate fifth of the world population. Um, and again, works by Morgan in 2000 team in 2008, and Morgan and team in 2013, and sort of again Morgan and team in 2006, sort of highlight some aspects in around this. Um, Education surrounding organ donation and transplantation thus needs to be enhanced through through the very health professionals, for example, that support clinical decision making, and so in this context, the healthcare scientists. Um, these health professionals need to or should be encouraged to provide a perspective on the important topic where laboratory care and practice is concerned. However, that also needs to be highlighted. However, what also needs to be highlighted is that this understanding requires a discussion with FIC. And FIC in this context is in context the Islamic faith, for example, is referred to as Islamic jurisprudence. Um, and so for every disease, there's a basis for a a cure, where and in context of cure as well. um, what listeners and viewers should perhaps sort of comprehend or have a basis in around, is that in context of cure, the definition of which there's the definition in around cure is ambiguous, from human thought to divine knowledge. However, those who do not believe, for example, in context of faith now, however, those who do not believe in, for example, mercy or practice it cannot expect to be saved by it. And there's works by Eaton in 1994, and Eaton in 2000, that sort of highlight aspects in around sort of the Islamic aspects in around Islamic jurisprudence, and also in around aspects of practices by those within the Islamic faith. And Eaton was a Cambridge academic, and a sort of an academic and sort of researcher in around sort of in around looking at aspects of the Islamic jurisprudence at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. In terms of strategies to promote organ donation and transplantation, there is a requirement. For example, multi-channel approaches, so that the issue a more so that the issue is a more is more known, or is more known from in context of of social norm in context as well of healthcare, in line to for example primary care, in context of primary care as well. So it is important at the same time that the subject area is, for example, again linked to those long-term conditions or health conditions that are indeed known to require organ transplantation for best prognoses and health outcomes. And there's works by, again, Morgan in 2010. There was a document by the Department of Health in 2008, and long-term conditions that healthcare scientists will, for example, healthcare scientists, for example, have a basis in around and aligned to this. For example, are in around a basis underlying sort of the pathologies in around this as well. So now in context of sort of Islam and the definition of knowledge or education or education. So Islam is commonly regarded as a religion of law, but above all, it is the religion of knowledge. The Arabic meaning word for law has the primary meaning of understanding, and thus relates to knowledge, And there's works by Rispler Chaim in 2007, Ghali in 2008, Sheikh in 2007, Al-Khawari and team in 2005, and works by Rocklinsenberg in 2009 as well. In Islam, knowledge, intelligence, and understanding define man as such. Man is not defined as good or is not defined as a good or strong creature, or even as one who loves but can be defined as one who understands or has the capacity for understanding. And again, there's works by those authors as per mentioned in some aspects in around this. In other words, if man penetrates deeply into self through layers of for example dreams and darkness, then comes out into the open and finds for example everything in around answers to particular questions, for example, that is knowledge. there are contentions, but the question is then who provides knowledge, and in answer to this, Islamic Islamic from an Islamic basis, from an Islamic basis, and in aligned to Islamic jurisprudence, it is Allah, God, God alone, and He alone deserves worship in this context. Um, Sorry, in a sort of in an over in a ro- in an overall context. In Islam, worship can also be defined as number one, Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, which is which is translated as the unity of of God's lordship, God's lordship. Number two, Tawheed al-Ibadah, or the unity of Allah's worship, or God's worship. And three, Tawheed al-Asma wal Sifat, al-Sifat, which is aligned to the unity of God or Allah's names, and His attributes. And there's works that have been documented by Rispler Chaim in 2007, Gali in 2008, and Sheikh in 2007, Al Khawari and team in 2005, in around this. And so this is why. So in line to this as well, this is why the Prophet the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was informed that, for example, he who knows himself knows his Lord, knows his Creator. And in a line to for example, in context of science. So science for a long time has been a foundation for establishing knowledge or education. And so the question now, the question now is, what does Islam say about science, and science, in around science? Um, when I mean science as well, listeners or viewers, is basically in around irrespective of, for example, sort of the sciences of physics, or the sciences in around healthcare, for example. So Islam and so in line to Islam and science, Islamic science has always been holistic. Holistic. The term in which of is of the terminology in which is of recent origin is sort of is of recent origin is somewhat ambiguous. Sometimes it refers only to the recognition of interdependence between mind and body, and there's works again by Rispler Chaim, and Rispler Chaim in 2007, Gali in 2008, Sheikh in 2007, Al Khawari and team in 2005, sort of retrospectively, and some works by Sissons in 2011 and Rockensberg in 2011 as well. Now, if theory relates to if theory relates to holism with reference to the Islamic perspective, then really it can only refer to the governing principle of Islam, or faith. And so Tawheed, which is sort of referred to as oneness of God or oneness of Allah, and the unity of that He has created, and it is through it is has been documented and sort of highlight and evidence, sorry, and evidenced that it is through trials and tribulation, for example, that man or mankind, which by the way, listeners and viewers, also includes women and womankind, that it is through trials that that humankind or mankind matures, and Allah, God willing, begin and through that, through those through that that they begin to face the reality of circumstances. Now, trials and tribulations from free humankind or mankind from the illusions in which man seeks refuge. And any attempt to, for example, study phenomena, for example, in around, i.e., for example, in line to organ donation or transplantation, without reference to, for example, scripture in context of the Quran, for example, is destined to failure. Is destined to failure because it is fragmented. It has fragmented a link with reality, um, and and it is also quintessential to note that religious morality sets limits which do not change with passing public opinion. And then it if and in light to this, if man denies the world around, if mankind or humankind denies the world around him as a self-evident truth, then the man is also denying a man is also denying Allah, God, is a self-evident truth as well. Now, science has limitations, and as I mentioned, this in context of science irrespective of physics or sciences in around context of healthcare or healthcare, for example, has limitations since it is time bound, not timeless, and thus for the Muslim or those in context of the Islamic faith, the Quran, the Quran is also referred to as the criterion, or where a criterion in context of the Quran, or in context of scripture, is referred to as Al Furqan. And the teaching to and the is where it's referred to as the criterion, is teaching to teaches from a faith context, teaching to discriminate not only between good and evil, but also between shades of grey. There's misnomers, the misnomers which are apparent in daily life, and the Quran in context of scripture is sort of multi faceted, and it is distinct, and is and has always been, for the Muslims throughout history, a basis for decision making as well. So, in line to this now, a little bit about healthcare, the healthcare scientist's role surrounding education for Muslim patients, for Muslim patients in context of this basis. So Muslims are have Muslims are perhaps the most ethnically diverse faith group in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, and the limited the limited sort of health data, the limited sort of health data shows or highlights that Muslims are perhaps about twice as likely to self-report poor health and disability as the general population. There's works by Wakefield and team in 2001, Wakefield and team in 2011, Sharif in 2012, O'Leary and team in 2015 in around this. Available Islamic literature to date does not provide detail with any indication or very little indication that organ transplantation took place during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. However, early discussions have some implications used as starting points by today's Muslims. And so within Islam, there are varying schools of thought when it comes to organ donation and transplantation, and there's works by Morgan in 2008, Morgan and team in 2008 as well, and Morgan and team in 2013, and Wakefield retrospectively in 2001 and in 2011, Sharif in 2012, and O'Leary O'Leary and team in 2015 in some aspects aligned to this. Now, Muslims in the UK, for example, believe that religion or faith prohibits organ donation, despite efforts of outreach groups to dispel this particular myth. In a study which asked the question, in a study that asked the question, what are your thoughts on organ donation and transplantation? Most Muslim participants were unwilling to discuss organ donation with families, for example, and the works have been sort of documented by Sharif in 2012. The current emphasis in the United Kingdom, in around this is where health education material would be where would be for donors, for example, to tell relatives sort of plans and to be of plans in around to be sort of worded sort of sensitively to consider the shared nature of decision making within Muslim families, for example. And whilst there are some perceptions of organ donation and transplantation, they do not represent sort of the Islamic world. There is one faith. There is no one faith. No one faith that sorry. There is no one faith that can claim, for example, privileged status regarding the complex and challenging questions of organ donation and transplantation. However, if policy sort of makers want to see, for example, an increase in organ donation and transplantation from the Muslim population, or those from the Islamic faith, around the Islamic faith, then a decision process, for example, aligned to NHS, National Health Services, for example, or NHS trusts, need to accommodate the Muslims and Muslim faiths in other ways. Healthcare scientists could be in context in line to this basis. Healthcare scientists could be proactive in this area of focus of healthcare, providing more informed understanding surrounding the tests and investigations behind the scenes. Specifically, there has been more effort to understand Muslim perspectives, but there needs to be further further cohesion between those producing policy Muslim involvement or yeah produce sorry between producing between those producing policy and Muslim involvement. An understanding of patient or recipients or individuals' attitudes towards self-management, and for example in around sort of technology could inform an unbiased sort of unbiased sort of patient-centered sort of aspect in around this. Moreover, literature has informed or does inform that the use of social media in particular, and perhaps more generally, provides a gateway for knowledge gathering and decision making. And there's works by Baker and team in 1999, Williams and team in 1998, Mohammed and team in 2015, and Nutbeam and team in 2000, that highlight some aspects in around sort of the sort of the aspects aligned to sort of the health literacy or the literacy aspects in around this as well. Um, in line to this, social media also influences some aspects in around technology adoption for health self-management, and sort of shaping the development for assessing the appropriateness of social media mediated, for example, interventions for patients or recipients or individuals, where sharing experiences or lived experiences are involved. Overall, a greater education of social media on health, in around health aspects of health or healthcare, organ donation, transplantation can help both clinicians to sort of gain a basis in around patient values and strategies for enhancing both important decision making and prompting education, since technology or aspects in around technology are almost every are used, and also a basis in a to almost everyday language, and this this sort of works um, this sort of works also encourages sort of professionals and policy makers to ensure there is a coverage of sensitive issues such as organ donation and transplantation through social media or mainstream media, so that the general public and those from the Islamic faith, but also from the Islamic faith and the Muslim faith, and population can make more informed decisions under more challenging circumstances. Certainly, certainly, social media applications have place, and it's important that such topics are discussed to encompass the Muslim faith and population. In Islam, it's been documented and evidence that in Islam, organ donation and transplantation is allowed, as Allah informs that for every disease there is a cure. More educational campaigns through social media or mainstream media involving, for example, healthcare scientists and sort of Muslim and Muslim faith communities are required, and those who do not believe in mercy, or practice it, cannot expect to be saved. Cannot be expected to be cannot expect to be saved by it. And there's works by Eaton, works by Eaton in 1994 and Eaton in 2000, who highlight some aspects in around the jurisprudence aspects in around sort of obligations, in around aspects of obligations, etc. Now, in around the sort of discussion as a whole in this, as part of this sort of Bostix feature, the the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for example, inform that suffering in this life is a short term. Attached sort of worldly life is at best a very brief. It is at best a very is very brief, and um, Islam never condemns what is natural to the human creature. Attachment becomes a grave sin when it leads to forgetfulness of what is, again, in the words of the Quran, better and long lasting. Um, Patients, service users, carers, etc., and the lay general public use, for example, the internet, social media to access information relating to organ donation, transplantation, and using social media perhaps has several gains compared to traditional forms of mainstream media where healthcare education is concerned. And there's work by, again, Nutbeam in 2018, O'Kane in 2015, and Prothero in sort of retrospectively in 2009. But both social media, mainstream media, have advantages with regards to reach, accessibility, and prompting organ donation or transplantation education. In relating health literacy is also important. Thus bridging gaps in understanding of specific areas of health. This is where healthcare scientists have an important basis to provide sort of health science transparency where other health professionals are challenged. Clarity of terminology to help increase health literacy on topics relating to organ donation transplantation is now especially required, owing to more people spending time online, and using social media versus, for example, mainstream media to provide education surrounding organ donation transplantation is still unique. However, healthcare scientists should seek opportunities to help raise more education surrounding this sensitive topic, in around sort of faith population, in line to this faith population and faith populations, in line to the sort of conclusions and sort of answering those questions that were highlighted, that were sort of outlined in the beginning of this works. So number one, can Muslims donate organs? Yes, Muslims can donate organs, and whilst there are some perceptions on organ donation and transplantation where Muslims can't, can't or cannot donate, can or cannot donate, sorry, when Muslims can't or cannot donate, these do not represent the broader Islamic world. A campaign promoting or prompting the need for increased blood and organ donation from Black and Asian minority ethnicities, or BAME, and Muslim faith had been published by Mohammedan team in 2015. There is no one faith that can claim privileged status regarding the complex and challenging questions of organ donation and transplantation. And and again, there are authors there are authors that have highlighted some aspects in around the sort of where there have been some documented sort of perspectives in around this in around the again the Islamic jurisprudence aspect. And the second question was, is there an Islamic stance on using social media or mainstream media to prompt organ donation and transplantation education? The Islamic stance on the use of either social media or mainstream media would be positive to prompt organ donation and transplantation if this helps to increase life expectancy. If policymakers want to see an increase in organ donation and transplantation from the Muslim faith or population, and a a more inclusive process in line to NHS trusts need to involve Muslims to help inform practice. And as works by Sheikh 2007, Morgan in 2008, and Morgan and team in 2008, Morgan and team in 2013, and sort of and works by Morgan as well in 2006. Sort of talk and highlight some aspects in around sort of inclusivity, aspects of inclusivity, and transplant and aspects of transplantation. Specifically, there needs to be further sort of cohesion between those producing policy and Muslim faith involvement. Number three, in line to the question, does the healthcare scientist have a sort of a role in providing the public education surrounding organ donation and transplantation? Well, the answer in around this is yes. However, more research is required to shed light on what is the most effective approach surrounding education for Muslim patients or recipients, or service users. The proliferation and broader usage of social media in combination to education of disease states through mainstream media over the past decade has created sort of opportunities for healthcare scientists to seek broader basis to contribute and inform sort of particular practices. So in line to the summary around this Bostix feature. So discussions need to be balanced to help to make informed decisions, and healthcare providers to prompt the right choices in care plans. There's works by Black and team in 2010 that highlights some aspects in around this. At the same time, an increase in life expectancy is worthless if the additional years do not lead to increasing if the additional years do not lead to an increase in education of the divine reality, and in context around jurisprudence and aspects of faith and faith practices. Works by Eaton in 1999, and works by Eaton in 2000 sort of highlight bases in around this. Practice and research now need or require sort of a basis to identify novel ways to deliver sensitive education, sort of education, and healthcare scientists could provide education through social media, mainstream media, through social media, mainstream media, and again works by as an example, as a sort of example in context of social media. There's works by the social media platform, the Renal Patient Support Group, the RPSG, for example, at least in around the time that this works was had been published in around 2019, where the RPSG social media platform had just over 8,000 members or service users, and service users at the time. So the RPSG in around this, the RPSG had perhaps been one of the sort of better examples, one of the better examples in context of as a social media platform where shared decision making can become more informed, owing to where service users shared lived experiences and stories, etc. And through social media platforms is where service providers can also have an important basis as well. So that closes this audio podcast in around the site. This audio podcast aligned to the science of Traption, and where this was audio podcast in regards to another Bostix Ruptre and another audio podcast aligned to Bostix the Bostix feature, another Bostix feature. This is the Bostix feature 4, and as with other sort of audio podcasts aligned to the science and Traption and other audio podcasts, there will be some descriptive information in line to resources, so people, listeners and viewers can check out some more of the works in around this particular subject sort of entity, through searching through searching the literature online as well. So thank you for tuning in on this audio podcast, the Bostix Ruptre, and audio podcast aligned to the science of Traption. This has been another chartered edition and another evidence-based perspective. And once again, this has been an audio podcast aligned to another Storm the Bostix feature. Thank you for tuning in.